Well, this is another video response to Matt on the general subject of integrating religion and science, sort of the distinction between brain and mind. So I watched the hour-long video, and I was frankly kind of disappointed. I mean, it was kind of just mush. A lot of talk about distinguished people's opinions, and yeah, okay, I am completely undistinguished, and I have no credentials at all, and so what? You know, I'm still worth arguing with, right? You know, the whole part of the presentation was just loaded with all these, you know, loaded phrases. Science can't explain this. Physics can't explain that. Biology can't explain this. And, you know, there was all kinds of points where, yeah, I could interject and say, well, that's that's not true. Okay, you can say it, but just make it true. And, you know, I mean, everybody can phrase an argument like this. Oh, well, that scientist has got a blind spot. That scientist has got blinders on. That scientist hasn't got his eyes open. And the guy who's really got his eyes open is some guy, you know, in the lotus position or whatever, you know, singing some Swami song or whatever. I mean, you know, this is all about, I guess this whole argument is about when we are allowed to draw conclusions, and what information we need before we can draw a conclusion, and when it is not you know, when does an assumption become a legitimate conclusion. So in my argument about the brain and consciousness, I'll just run through it. I mean, first I'll point out that you know, the three sciences, physics, chemistry, and biology, it's one science. Okay, they're all in the same continuum. So, you know, let's preface the argument with agreement, okay, that there's no lines. These are artificial lines drawn. All right, physics, you know, leads to chemistry, chemistry leads to biology. They're just, you know, they're naturally tied to each other. You can't have one without the other. It's all, that is already integrated. So let's integrate that to start with. And then I guess I should point out too, the whole word integration, or the whole idea of this idea, it doesn't even have a conclusion. It doesn't even have an ultimate objective that makes any sense, because you know, we would agree on the world we would recreate. I think we'd recreate you know, we'd both be concerned about having a self-sufficient, functional society that is not just consumption, that is also production, that it's consuming but it's producing. And yeah, we don't have that, and so I agree, we're just a consumption society. And but who you know, this world isn't going to be created by integrating science and religion, because the only religion you're going to integrate with, maybe, if any, is mystics who aren't doing anything. You know, guys sitting on the ground contemplating their experience. You know, the people running the world are the Christians, and they're the greediest bastards on earth. Most materialistic bastards on earth, and they're all about their dogma. They're not going to give up their dogma. Their dogma is their religion, because it's all bullshit. They don't even follow their own dogma. They just make up their dogma. I mean, it can say 7 times in the Bible that you're not, you know, the odds of you getting into heaven are those of the camel going through the eye of a needle, but they'll ignore that, you know, because the next line is, you know, with God all things are possible. And that's the one to cling to. And so they can be somebody splashing with water at their birth, and as long as they say I'm sorry when they're dying, they get into heaven. It doesn't matter how many people they screw over or how much, you know, grief they cause during their life. It's all forgiven, because, you know, that's what Jesus did. Yeah, he died so everybody can be an asshole. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever, but that's their dogma, and they're going to cling to it. Okay, they're not going to become mystics. They're not going to become you know, enthralled with the idea of investing in the long term. They're only going to care about now. They want their Maserati now. All right, they're not going to, they don't want to give up anything for the future. They don't look at other people as being equals. They're elitists. They're arrogant elitists. Okay, they believe they are better than other people. They believe they have what they have because they are superior. And they're not going to climb into any kind of perception of the universe that has any kind of humanity or compassion or decency. Alright, so enough ranting about that. The whole idea is just far-fetched. You're not going to be able to combine, you're not going to integrate these religious assholes into, your new theology, whatever it is. Alright, so that's, I don't want to waste time on that. Let's get to the subject. The real important one is this whole definition of consciousness. And the fact that, the claim that it hasn't been qualified or quantified or defined. And I completely reject that notion. Yeah, we have defined it. We understand its purpose. All right, consciousness somehow developed in organisms as a way of combining two brains, essentially. Okay, they had the one brain. They needed this ambiguous motivator, this way to motivate organisms to do something, but then they had this balance against, they needed some way to temper that, so they didn't just overreact and constantly herky-jerky kind of behavior. They needed something that could moderate their behavior, and then also later learning became part of that. But I mean, the capacity to feel is really, I think, the origins of consciousness. I think it makes perfectly good sense to think of it in those terms, that you have a feeling, which is this ambiguous thing, and it compels you to do something, but it doesn't necessarily doesn't spell it out for you. And so you have this other part of your mind that tries to figure out what to do to fix the feeling, and it tries to figure out it makes an equation out of it, and it says to itself, like I said, I gave you this example before, but you could imagine yourself an organism, and you're in this environment, and the only way you can survive in this environment is to be a little bit cautious, because there's all these other animals trying to eat you. So when you're going out to get your meal, to do your eating, you have to be a little careful that the other animals don't eat you. So hunger is a good thing to have, because you got to do the daily, you got to get your nutrients, so the body's got to motivate you to do it. And at the same time, though, you have this other part of your brain that's tempering you, because it's learned that there's these beasties out there that are going to chomp you to pieces too. And so you don't overreact to the hunger. You just don't rush out and get yourself eaten. Instead, you're clever about it. You'll sit there and temper your hunger, and you'll wait until the right opportunity to seize the moment and to get your meal in safety. And so anyway, that's how this all evolved. I mean, first you had feeling organisms, and then you had thinking organisms, and then you had learning organisms, or learning and thinking, whichever ones came first. And we're just part of that continuum. We are just another organism. We are just another animal, and we have this subtle little difference, this subtle capacity where we can store all this information outside of our minds, outside of our brains, our physical brains, and it allows us to become civilized. And we just can't be fooled by that civilization into thinking there's some sort of special purpose, that there's some sort of deliberate cause or some sort of mystical arrangement in the universe that's going to somehow account for that and make that make sense. Okay, but life doesn't just become purposeless because we weren't designed with a purpose. The fact is, we are here. We have intelligence. We're perhaps as far as we know, the most intelligent thing in the universe. And so there's a huge responsibility, and that in itself should make us, we should be stunned and awed just to have the privilege of owning an intelligence. Because when you think of the billions of years, 4 billions of years of animals, just marching through life in a retarded fashion, and here we have the privilege to step out of the maze and to look at the world and see it for what it is. I mean, it's a magnificent thing, and that should be enough. You should be able to find enough purpose with that. Okay, you don't need to contrive this idea that consciousness is anything other than the consequence of an arrangement of brain parts. I mean, I don't think theoretically there's any reason to believe there's any possibility that we're going to create consciousness in some kind of static physical device. There's not going to be a silicone consciousness, because whatever it is, whatever that relationship is between this electricity and the way it's arranged is just so complex and so special. I just don't think it's practical to think it's just something you can generate out of